looks down at her calloused fingers, her full attention on fixing any of the broken threads the machine may have missed. At 9 years old, this is her 6th month in the New England cotton factory. She reminds herself the money this job gives helps feed her family and herself. She tries to take a deep breath, but the air is heavy with humidity, needed to keep the cotton fibers pliable for spinning thread. Her friend, Rachel, waves her arms to get Anna's attention. Rachel tries to shout over the loud machines, something about having only 1 more hour until lunch. Anna can't hear her over the clinking of the many gears. Rachel holds up one finger, and Anna nods back. The message has been received. Then suddenly, a woman appears from the corner of Anna's eye. The woman is well dressed, her gray skirts slightly brushing the floor over her clean leather boots. Anna sees the woman's brow is furrowed as she talks to the man in charge. The woman taps her pen to her clipboard, then gestures in Anna's direction. Anna stands up a little straighter and settles her eyes more firmly on the spinning threads before her, hoping to make a good impression on whoever this lady may be. Anna feels a shadow fall over her and looks up to see the well-dressed lady. "How old are you, young lady?" she asks Anna. Without thinking, Anna answers honestly, 9 years old, ma'am. The woman looks Anna up and down and then starts scribbling determinedly on the top paper of her clipboard. Anna wonders if she's answered the question right or wrong. "You are coming with me," the lady informs her. "You are going to school." Anna realizes she may have given the wrong answer. This story isn't just Anna's. It's one of millions of children removed from child labor. The year is 1870. Child labor is commonplace in the United States, with 1 in 5 children working in factories or other industrial work. The work is not only hard, but dangerous. Long shifts and large machinery led to, at times, serious injuries. Reformers fight that the working age should be raised to 14 years old. They are met with resistance from industry leaders. Children are the perfect size to move beneath the cotton machines and other small spaces, and children can be paid a portion of what their adult counterparts are. Reformers decide they need a campaign to change the way the public view child labor. This is where photographer Lewis Hine comes in. In 1908, he begins photographing children working in these factories and coal mines. His pictures are harrowing. The children look in the camera as if they're looking into your soul. The campaign is successful, and soon laws begin to change. But the real question society now faces is, where do these children go? And what do they do instead of work in factories? The answer? Schools. It's been a week since the nice-dressed lady took Anna from the factory and enrolled her in school. As Anna walks home, she thinks about how the change has been both the same and different. Different in that now she works her brain more than her fingers. But there is much the same about this school as the factory. There are bells that tell her when to come and go, like in the factory. The desks are in rows, like the spindles she used to manage. Except now the rows are students, and she is the spindle. There is no longer an overseer telling her how much thread she needs to meet her daily quota. But she now has a teacher that tells her how much she must know and by when she must know it. The quota is no longer the thread in her hands, but her ability to grasp the skills someone has chosen as important. The teacher tells Anna that this will give her a better chance in her life. Anna's grateful because her teacher is kinder than the overseer, and Anna is excited to untangle the letters on the page so she can read a fairy tale to her sister one day. But Anna still can't stop thinking about how this place called school and the factory she left still seem too eerily similar. The school Anna is in is called a common school, and they are developed out of necessity. As children were removed from factories, they needed somewhere to go, and these schools are the answer. The funding is low, running primarily on property taxes in local communities, with the state supplementing portions of the system. Efficiency is key. Large classes, bells to keep students moving, and regimented schedules keeps a large amount of students running smoothly. This is progress. Children now have a chance to live more healthy and more educated lives. Reformers feel the victory of a more educated society and can only imagine what the future will hold. But then something strange happens. A temporary solution somehow becomes a permanent way of educating, not just for a decade, but for over a century. The reality is, these common schools didn't fail. They succeeded at what they were meant to do. They gave children a chance outside of the dangers of factory work and the possibility of a better future during the Industrial Revolution. But these schools were not designed around children's needs. They were designed for this time in history, where the priority was optimal efficiency with very limited resources. These schools had an imprint of factory work. mimicking the change of an agricultural to a more industrial society. The Industrial Revolution ended around 1914, yet many of our schools still run with very similar qualities to the one Anna would have attended. School is still structured around efficiency. Class sizes are often determined by funding, not by optimal learning. Bells tell students when learning starts and stops. Schedules are mandated and curriculum is standardized from grade to grade and from school to school. It's as if the educational world has been frozen back in time, but the world has kept moving. And it begs the question, are we really preparing our students for a current world? Or for one that no longer exists? I'm Yanni. Thanks for watching Educator University. If you like this video, you might also like this one. See you in the next video.